Welcome to Talk is Cheap, and this hat is made of hemp. And if you were with us last week, you'd know what I was talking about. Well, if you don't know what I'm talking about, John Birrenbach from the Institute for Hemp is back, and we'll recap a little bit of last week's show, so don't go using your remote and channel surfing. Stick around. Welcome back, John.
Oh, glad to be back.
Now, for those people who are maybe going, hemp, let's explain, kind of recap quickly for them what we were talking about last week. We weren't talking about legalizing pot for smoking, but we were talking about the legal uses of the hemp plant.
For all of these other wonderful, marvelous products like the baseball hat that you have right there. Basically, yeah, the marijuana plant, or the plant that produces marijuana as one of its many different products, can produce a whole variety of other products that we could use to, in place of what we're currently using. For example, paper for trees could be made from hemp. Instead of making paper from trees, we could use hemp to replace cotton. We could use hemp to replace, in place of many vegetable oils, we could use hemp in biodiesel fuel, as methanol fuel. So we're talking about a whole bunch of other different products here other than what people commonly know cannabis for, or the smoking purposes.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the interesting points that you brought out last week was the hemp that's used for these products, which are legal, is not the same hemp that people are smoking to get high.
Right.
That in fact hemp for paper or cloth isn't even good for those people who might want to get high.
That's true. Much like we have many different varieties of corn. There's sweet corn and field corn. There's marijuana cannabis, and there's hemp cannabis. They're really two very distinct varieties of the same plant, much like a red rose and a yellow rose or a white rose are. They're both roses, but one's red and one's yellow. You can see it obviously. With these types of hemp, they virtually have no THC or the psychoactive property of cannabis, so they can't really even be used for smoking purposes.
Okay, now let's have you throw out a couple of those economic facts of what the potential impact, and I guess what the impact is right now on the economy.
Well, the impact right now on the economy is we're seeing probably in the neighborhood of $50 to $100 million worth of hemp products being imported into the United States each and every year. Those products are then being remanufactured into like the baseball hats and shirts and shorts and a whole variety of other products. In the last few days, I've talked to companies that are making combat boots and hiking shoes, and just the number of products just becomes endless. So we're seeing probably in the neighborhood of $250 million in remanufactured hemp products already being made in the United States. And if we were to institute hemp cultivation in the United States, for paper production alone, we're looking at about $30 billion annually to the farm economy, with probably an additional $25 to $30 billion added to the rural economy in the form of jobs that support the hemp industry. So we're looking at probably $30 to $60 billion being pumped into rural Minnesota, rural Iowa, Wisconsin, into what was traditionally known as the hemp belt, and helping those farmers out a bit.
Okay. Now, for those people who have been able to move past the smoking pot issue here and are listening, economically, why use hemp?
Economically, it really is not so much a matter of economics, except that we need to shift some additional farm money to the farm income. People don't understand, but years and years ago, the farm economy was extremely diverse. Much like a stockbroker has a diverse portfolio, the farmers had a diverse portfolio of crops that they could go to. In a given year, like let's say last year, where we had the floods that didn't allow the farmers to plant the corn, the rain continued, they weren't able to plant the soybeans. In years past, they would go to other crops that could be planted later and at least get them something that would get them by through that year. Hemp would have been one of those crops. Hemp could have been a crop that here in Minnesota we could plant as late as June or July, and the farmers should be able to get a yield high enough that they'll at least cover their expenses and they won't have to ask for a government aid. So that's a real vital economic issue, is to add a diversity to the farm economy that's been lost.
Let's say that hemp was used in paper, just looking at that industry. What happens to the loggers, the truckers, the plants that process the wood into paper?
Well, most of the logging industry should support hemp cultivation for paper use, because paper is a tremendous demand on trees. We use 57 million metric tons of raw virgin timber in the production of paper every year, which is a sizable amount. Those trees should be better left used to manufacture things like homes, furniture, items like that. So by reducing the amount of stress upon what the remaining forests we have left, the loggers that are still working should continue to have their jobs and should be able to maintain their jobs well into the future doing that type of stuff. Instead of cutting down trees for pulp, they'll be cutting down trees so we can make homes. The paper industry shouldn't fear this, because most of the workers are going to work that are working in the paper industry now, rather than working in northern Minnesota, Cloquet, or other areas like that where they're currently making paper, they'll move into rural Minnesota. And that's just basically for the pulping operations. Beyond that, the actual finishing of paper and the manufacturing of sheet paper and stuff like that, that can all take place in the existing facilities.
So there's not retooling of equipment, really?
Actually, in order to process hemp to a pulp, the amount of equipment that's required, the mechanical equipment, the pulping, the grinding of the trees down into a pulp, is not required, because the hemp, when it's separated from fiber, the hurd that's left over and would be used to make paper is already in a pre-pulp state and basically ready for cooking. So we would see paper mills are a tremendous energy drain. We would see a reduction in that need for energy just because the pulping process is going to change initially. It's going to be a simpler process to use. So there's going to be some benefits for the paper manufacturer. He's not going to have to invest in a lot of high-tech, a lot of hard equipment that pulps man labor and equipment pulping these logs down. He's going to save a lot.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the legalization issue, because at one point in this country, growing hemp for products like this was legal. In fact, you said that some government contracts require hemp to be in products that the government uses.
There is some current government contracts that, or should I say government specifications for that. When a product is asked for by the government, a company goes and finds the specifications that call for cannabis hemp. We've really come a long way. At one time, hemp was considered legal tender. You could pay your taxes in Pennsylvania up until the early 1800s with hemp that you grew. The early Virginia colonies demanded hemp cultivation. Any farmer that had over an X number of acres of land was required to plant X percentage of it to hemp, and if he didn't, he'd go to jail. So we've come a long way from where hemp was considered so valuable you could go to jail for not cultivating it, to it's now such a forbidden crop that you'll go to jail for cultivating it. Thomas Jefferson was very interested in hemp. George Washington was a hemp cultivator and made numerous notes in his diaries about when he planted the hemp and how it was growing and stuff like this. There's a lot of our history is in hemp. Minnesota had a great hemp industry up until 1939. I've been researching at the Minnesota Historical Society, and I've come to find out that the Stillwater State Penitentiary was a major hemp processing facility. They took the raw stalks from the farmers and processed it into many of the various goods that we've got already here. So we've got a tremendous history of hemp in Minnesota, and it's being denied us right now.
Okay. Take a real short break, then we'll be right back with more.
Oh, I love that song.
It's gonna make me want to dance.
Hey! It's Pure Party, 2 rockin' CDs, free with your paid subscription to Entertainment Weekly.
What I like about you,
Yeah!
pump up the jam, pump it up.
Pure Party, 24 tunes on 2 CDs.
Pump it up, yo, pump it up.
Call now and get these 2 incredible CDs or audio cassettes absolutely free when you subscribe to Entertainment Weekly.
Tonight I'm gonna party like it's 1999.
Call now and get 30 issues for 4 monthly installments of only $5.99 each. Almost 70% off the cover price. You can even use your credit card. 2 free CDs with a subscription?
These are my favorite songs.
That's a double bonus.
That's great.
Call now. Save almost 70% on Entertainment Weekly and get the Pure Party CDs free.
We're back. Talk is cheap. Now, John, the background film that people are seeing is actually a U.S. government film. Hemp for Victory or Victory.
Yeah. That was required viewing of all farmers in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, pretty much throughout the Midwest during World War II. The Japanese, when they took over the Philippines, cut off our sources of fiber, and the farmers of the United States were asked to, with their patriotic efforts, grow as much hemp as they possibly could for rigging for battleships and parachutes and a whole bunch of other different uses. The interesting thing is that the seed for the hemp crop, for the Hemp for Victory crop, came from a gentleman down in Kentucky. He's still alive and well and remembers it well, the day that the military arrived to basically take over his 10 acres of hemp that he was growing for seed so that they could distribute it to all of the various hemp plantations throughout the Midwest. It's quite an interesting film, and it's remarkable, showing how our government, even in a matter of a few years, 1938 was when marijuana was made illegal and the hemp industry was killed. 1942 they come out with a film, we need hemp, grow it, here's the seed, no problem with permits. It's quite an amazing turnaround.
Okay, let's start with 1938. Why was hemp made illegal? Why is it illegal today?
The reason that was given to Congress was that cannabis produced marijuana. Marijuana was being used and people were committing crimes. This whole thing seems to really be a smokescreen for the fact that people have been consuming cannabis in smokable form for thousands of years. In fact, during Prohibition here in Minneapolis and St. Paul, we had Turkish hash parlors where you could openly go in and buy hashish. Hashish was given away at several of the world's fairs as kind of a thing. You know, here it's new, try it, give it a shot, kind of a thing. Sears Roebuck in his early catalogs had hash candy, and it was considered, you know, your kid's melancholy or something like that, give them a piece of this, it helps perk them up. From that came all of these fears that we had of a lot of them were portrayed stereotypically racist. You know, a black man smokes pot with white woman, result pregnancy. In the 30s, that was just not something that was to be done, and looked down upon quite harshly. But I think that again was just a smokescreen to cover the commercial applications. Until the early 1930s, hemp wasn't competitive with a lot of the other products. There were equipment that hadn't yet been developed that would take hemp to where it would be today by making it a billion-dollar crop. We have to remember that in 1936, hemp was labeled by Popular Mechanics as the new billion-dollar crop. And now this was the first time that anyone had ever referred to a crop as a billion-dollar crop. Corn had yet to be labeled a billion-dollar crop. The machinery that processed hemp came about in the 20s and early 30s and was getting a great deal of publicity. The Department of Agriculture was looking at it, and it appears that people who had a vested interest in seeing that hemp did not compete with their products began a smear campaign against the plant. Mm-hmm. Prior to 1929, 1930, the word marijuana had not been heard north of southern Mexico. There was only a small little province in southern Mexico that had used the word marijuana, and it just so happens that in that town there was a paper mill being run by Randolph Hearst. Randolph Hearst was one of the many paper magnates that was approached in the early 20s and the late 20s. This equipment's being made. We can now make paper out of hemp. You don't need to cut down trees. But these people said, wait a minute, I've got millions of dollars worth of trees in acreage. I own the trains that are taking the trees to the pulp mill. I own the pulp mills. I own the paper mills. I own the newspapers that the paper is printed on. I'm not giving up all of that. Mm-hmm. And began a smear campaign against the plant, which we see in effect basically up until today.
Okay. Now, hemp is legal to grow in Europe and parts of the Far East.
Actually, hemp is legal here to grow here. if you can get the proper permits from the proper government agencies. Here in Minnesota, I've been in an ongoing battle with the state trying to get a permit from them to cultivate hemp. They've given me a conditional permit if I get a permit from the DEA. Well, DEA wants us to have a 10-foot high steel fence with razor wire, guard towers, armed machine guns, and a whole bunch of this kind of stuff in order to protect this no THC marijuana, basically, is what they're trying to call it. So we find that to be a little bit ridiculous, but theoretically, the laws exist that we could cultivate hemp here. The government agencies that oversee it won't allow it to happen, but it is, like you're saying, being done in countless numbers of countries overseas. I mean,
And what kind of problems are they seeing with drug use rising or people raiding their farms?
my first-hand experience with the Soviet Union, back when they were the Soviet Union, they sent representatives here and we talked about hemp and how they were growing it and what they were doing with it and any problems that they had with it. And they said that, you know, from time to time they have people that steal the hemp, but they don't ever see them come back for more, and that's obvious because of the varieties that they're growing. My feeling is that the areas that cultivate hemp for commercial applications have very little bit of marijuana being produced, just because of the genetic factors of if you've got a large amount of no THC hemp being grown, and you're trying to grow high potency hemp or marijuana, it's going to be next to impossible to keep the potency high, because of the pollution from the low potency genes getting into the high potency and producing offspring that are low potency.
Now, offspring, wouldn't those come in next season?
That would be next season, next generational type things, but it would be a case of, in order to develop high potency marijuana, you have to start somewhere. And if you're a grower that's living in an area where low potency marijuana is being grown, you're never going to be able to increase the potency of your marijuana. It's always going to decrease in potency. So it's just, it becomes a futile effort.
Okay.
You know, you're always going to have to get seed for your marijuana crop from outside the region from where your hemp is being grown, if that's what you want to do.
Now, do you know if in countries like France where they grow it, is there a problem with people doing what you're saying,
They don't
trying
seem
to
to
mix
see
in?
a problem where a lot of the question is, well, somebody will mix it in there, and you know, every other plant will be a high potency one, and he'll know. Well, the French have a unique kind of system. Well, all of Europe is kind of under the same system where you're allowed to grow varieties of hemp that have less THC than other chemicals that are found in the plant, CBDs and CBNs. If they come out and test your field and find that the hemp that they test contains a higher percentage of THC than allowed under the permit, they burn the field down.
Now, are they burning down a lot of fields?
They're not burning down any fields. The farmers, for the fear of that alone, hemp is extremely valuable over in Europe. Hemp is a subsidized crop over in Europe. You can get paid by the French government $250 US to grow an acre of hemp and grow it for seed. In addition to that seed, you then sell off at a pretty fair price. Hemp seed's around 45 cents a pound here in the United States if you buy 20,000 pounds of it at a time. There's a sizable income there, plus they're also selling the stalks over to the paper industry in France that's making paper out of the hemp too. So they're really encouraged by the fact that they'll lose their subsidy, they'll lose the seed crop, and they'll lose the pulp crop, not to even take the chance. So they don't really see it. They're not burning crops down over there, and they're not having a problem with it.
Okay. And again, the United States has a need to import how many tons of?
We're importing, I think the last figure I saw was somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 100 metric tons. No, it must be 100 to 200 metric tons of hemp seed annually through just a couple of importers that I know about. They're importing on the neighborhood of about 10 tons 3 times a year, and there's 3 to 4 importers that are bringing hemp seed into the United States that I currently deal with.
Okay. Take another short break, and we'll be right back with more.
Your feet could be worth a lot of money. All they have to do is walk, march, or even slide in the Super Cities Walk for Multiple Sclerosis. The pledge money they earn will help support research and provide services for the thousands of people who have MS. 2 of the greatest contributions you could make to multiple sclerosis are your feet.
Walk April 10th. Call 870-1500. Babysitters, winter jackets, swimming lessons, band instruments, uniforms, new clothes, summer camp. Kids are great, but they aren't cheap. Don't miss out on money your family can get at tax time. Even if you don't owe any taxes, there may be a refund waiting for you. Call the Working Family Credit Hotline, 1-800-937-KIDS. That's 1-800-937-KIDS. Minnesota's Working Family Credit. You've earned it. Your kids deserve it.
Now, here we are, 1994, and anybody who picks up a newspaper, watches the news, sees the problems that this society has with drugs. If people pick up and read The Emperor Wears No Clothes or some of the other materials about hemp's legal uses, you see a battle brewing. Is there any possibility in our lifetimes in this century that we're going to see hemp legalized for commercial uses like this?
Well, I have to point to the other countries that have reinstituted hemp cultivation. England reinstituted it just this last year. In 1993, they cultivated the first that they'd cultivated since World War II. There have been people actively agitating in England since the early 1980s to reestablish hemp as a paper crop alone because of England's lack of trees. They basically import every scrap of paper, and anything a farmer can do to make a crop like that is going to be is well worth it. So it took them quite some time. There's talk in Canada of several of the provinces relaxing the restrictions, going to a European style of allowing cultivation to happen up there. If we see hemp cultivation in Canada this year or next year, we'll see it in the United States in the following year, mainly because of NAFTA. Anything they can do in Canada, we can do here.
Now, isn't that going to be sort of a hard sale for a congressman to say, let's legalize hemp? I mean, it really opens them up as a potential target for an opponent.
Well, they really have to understand that when they talk about legalizing hemp, they're not talking about legalizing drugs. They're talking about reestablishing some really sound commercial businesses that used to be in the United States and were promised back in '38 when Congress passed these ridiculous marijuana laws. They promised the industry, we will protect you. You'll be allowed to cultivate hemp. The hemp industry will continue to thrive. If you have further expansions and stuff, it'll all be great. Well, here we are. We have no hemp industry except for what's been growing since 1989. So they're really in the favor of reestablishing one of the environmentally beneficial plants that can be grown. I mean, hemp requires none of the fertilizers and the pesticides that cotton requires. It's annually renewable, unlike trees. It can be used to manufacture all of these products without producing all of the pollution that's being used to manufacture all of the other products. Paper made from trees is extremely chemical intensive, requires sulfuric acid and chlorine bleach and a whole bunch of this other stuff. We just don't use that when you manufacture paper from hemp. To this day, anything that is kept in an archival material is kept on hemp paper because its shelf life is almost 1,000 years. Paper made from trees, the shelf life is 30, 40, 50 years, which is why we're seeing books degrading in the libraries now. They're falling apart at the bindings. I encourage anybody to go look at the books. You'll see anything that's published prior to 1850 is made with a part of hemp, cotton, and other natural fibers. Those books are still pliable. You can read the pages and they don't break. You get anything that's made between 1850 and 1910 and it's fallen apart. So we're really talking about saving what's there, saving our history because we'll print it on paper that's going to last forever. We're going to allow the farmer to have this additional diversity. We're going to help the environment by stopping some of the pollution-causing industries, and we haven't even touched upon the fact that hemp can be used as a methanol fuel to fuel all the cars and trucks, and I mean, there alone we're talking about a tremendous impact. So,
I would think some of the gas companies might have a problem with that.
Well, this is where I think that we're going to find our biggest problem is going to be when push comes to shove. Are the gas companies and the paper industry or the forestry products industry, are they going to really put up a big stink about it? And I think they're going to be the ones that really complain the loudest. Right now they're currently using their other mouths, basically, some of the other organizations that are saying, this is just a ploy to legalize marijuana and all the rest of that kind of stuff as their method that they used back in the 30s that worked real well for them, use the newspaper, spread disinformation, and try to sabotage it from within.
Well, what kind of movement is there to legalize for these types of uses? I mean, is it a large group of people? Are these the type of people that are going to get it?
It's a much larger, yeah, it's a much larger group of people than would be considered the marijuana legalization movement. The marijuana legalization movement, I would say, would probably be half the size of the hemp legalization movement. Partly that's because the people that are in favor of legalizing marijuana are in favor of legalizing hemp, and they think this is a really great way that they can, you know, look, here's another reason why this plant should be legal. Not only is it, you know, supposedly safe and all the rest of that stuff, here's another great thing. But at the same time, it's brought in a whole group of people that could really care less about the drug aspect of the plant. I spend my time 8 to 10 hours a day focusing strictly on the commercial applications, and even if I wanted to, couldn't think of how I could spend any other time or devote any other time to any other parts, medicinally or recreational use of this plant. So it's brought a whole group of other people. It's brought environmentalists into it that just otherwise wouldn't have even given any consideration at all to cannabis.
Well, it sounds like the recreational use movement is actually detracting from the hemp movement to legalize it for, again, the legal products.
I would think so, and I think that that's also true of the medicinal. You know, there's also a sub-group of medicinal activists that really just deal with, you know, it's good for medicine, can be used to treat a whole bunch of different diseases and stuff, that in a way where we all kind of detract from each other because we're all talking about the same plant, but we're all talking about different aspects of it. And if the recreational users would put aside being allowed to use it recreationally and fight for the medicinal use, which I too believe is also not a bad idea, that if a doctor prescribes it and thinks that it's a good medicine for the patient should have access to it, that if they were to put their energies into that or into the commercial applications of hemp, that we'd see commercial hemp established a lot quicker than what we're seeing now. You know, it'd be a much greater force of people out there.
Now,
not to say that they're not supporting us, but they're also supporting us with an ulterior motive, and the ulterior motive detracts from what it is that I'm trying to do to a certain extent.
Now, the plight of the farmer is another well-known subject. What kind of support is coming from the rural parts of, as you say, basically what is the corn and wheat belt?
I spend a lot of my time going around to colleges and stuff like that here in the Midwest, and speaking with farmers, speaking with college students, and just talking with anybody. When I get feedback from the farmers and stuff like that, and most of the farmers in Minnesota, if they're old enough, either they remember their dads grew hemp or they grew hemp themselves during the wartime, and a lot of them to this day don't understand that hemp and marijuana are basically the same plant, and it will take me pulling out a dictionary or something with a picture that's clearly labeled cannabis marijuana, and they look at it and go, oh my gosh, you know, you're right, that, you know, now I understand why we don't grow it anymore. But up until then, they couldn't understand why it is that they didn't grow hemp. And most of them, when I talk to them about that hemp's going to be worth between $400 and $500 an acre, they're ready to jump on it. And in my entrepreneurial mind, I'm saying, well, geez, 1 acre of hemp for paper is worth $100 a metric ton delivered to the mill ready to be pulped. At 5 to 10 tons per acre, there's a considerable margin there above the $500 an acre that we'd be paying farmers, and the farmers are glad to get $350 an acre for corn now in a good year. So they're really encouraged. They're ready to go for it. We've got a number of farmers that are ready to plant. All they need is the seed and the okay to do it, and they're ready to go.
Now, if someone is curious and wants to call the Institute and learn more about, can they do that? What will they find out?
Feel free to call me at any time. I've got an answering machine that doesn't answer when there isn't somebody in the office. We're normally in noon to 5, Monday through Saturday. We've got a catalog of hemp products, information, videos, books, T-shirts, that kind of stuff, some flyers that tell about hemp's commercial applications and its history and stuff like that. We'd be glad to send that to them for you. So yeah, they can feel free to call at any time. That's pretty much what I spend most of my time, is dealing with people asking questions. If I don't know the answer, I'll direct you to the person that does.
Okay, thank you, John. This has been Talk is Cheap, and we'll be back next week.